Most people think of their age as their chronological age, though with the rising prevalence of longevity research and people wanting to kind of biohack living longer, people are realizing that biological age and chronological age are not always aligned. Two people can be basically the same chronological age, though one could be aging much faster than the other. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my own biological age testing results using TruDiagnostic's TruAge and TruHealth tests, kind of what they measured, what my data showed, and the lifestyle changes that I've made afterwards. So this isn't exactly about just chasing immortality, but trying to understand where my quote-unquote biological age is compared to my chronological age, and understanding where I could be doing better in terms of pace of aging. So if you're new here, I'm Manny with OMICm Health. I work with people who are into the aesthetics, longevity, and general physical health and holistic health space. So biological testing like TruDiagnostic's TruAge and TruHealth reports are things that I personally use and to help dial in my own habits and the habits of those I work with. So before we dive right in, I think it's important to kind of clarify chronological versus biological age. So chronological age is essentially how long you've actually been alive. So that's going to be the age on your birth certificate, whatever current year is minus your year of birth. That's your chronological age. The concept of biological age, rather, a little different. It's an estimate of how well your body's functioning relative to other people. So it's kind of a comparative measure. It works in a percentile type method. So things like sleep, stress, training load, nutrition, recovery, inflammation, these are all things that can affect your biological age. And then the idea here is that biological age can be somewhat modifiable as opposed to chronological age, which of course can't be. So what do these tests actually measure? So TruDiagnostic uses something called DNA methylation. So your DNA itself doesn't change, but how your genes are expressed does. So methylation patterns, they'll give insight into how much stress your system has been under, how well it's adapting, etc. So there's two main tests that I'm going to be talking about today. TruAge focuses on biological age and how fast you're aging, whereas TruHealth goes a little bit deeper, looks at specific systems like metabolic health, inflammation, immune function, and just general stress response. Now, it's important to know that a single biological age number by itself doesn't really mean much, and this is kind of where people go wrong with these types of tests. What actually matters more than anything are your patterns and trends, and so this is something very similar to even body weight, right? So you can weigh yourself one morning, perhaps you're holding a bit more water, the scale shows 180 pounds, for example. A day or two later, the scale may show 171 pounds, perhaps you were dehydrated, you had a long night, et cetera, et cetera. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you lost that many pounds in 1 to 2 days. What's actually happening is just other variables that are kind of fluctuating around. So this is similar, these biological age tests are similar in that regard. What we're wanting to look for is patterns and trends. We want to see, are we generally trending in a positive fashion or in a negative fashion? So in this case, a positive fashion would be you're reducing your biological aging and just making the lifestyle improvements to do so. And alternatively, in a negative sense, the next time you take the test, if your pace of aging has increased, it may be cause for concern, right? So these are things that kind of average out over time. Of course, the more tests that you take, you're going to start to see what approximates more the actual trend in your health. So let's keep that in mind, that one single test, just kind of a snapshot in time, does not necessarily mean it's the end all be all. So I'll jump into my results. So the first one here is the OMICm Age, and that one for me, I came in at a biological age of 22.3. So that, of course, means it's younger than my chronological age. There's also the other test here. So this is the Symphony Age test. And for that one, I came in at 21.2, which again, both favorable results, slightly different. There are different ways that these are calculated, but overall, based on this being my first test, pretty happy with the results. I think both are solid numbers. Moving on here, we also see the Pace of Aging score. So the Pace of Aging score is essentially a measure of how fast you're biologically aging compared to your chronological age. So a score of 1 or below is generally considered good. A score of exactly 1, for example, would just mean that you're biologically aging at exactly the same rate as chronological age. So for every year of chronological age, you're aging 1 year biologically. So for myself, my Dunedin Pace of Aging score was 0.75. Another number I'm quite happy with. So in theory, what does that mean? If you kind of subscribe to the idea of biological age versus chronological age, that would mean that for every year chronologically that I age, I'm only aging 0.75 of a year biologically. So definitely a positive result. I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting, but I'm happy to see that my pace of aging is seemingly quite low. So happy with that. Now, the Symphony Age piece, if we're just going back a bit here, the second test that we just talked about, Symphony Age kind of looks at the scores of different organ systems, each of them having their own biological age in this formula. So I have my results here. Some of my youngest, if you want to call it that, include the brain at 20.7 age, biological age, the heart that's 20.4, immune system 20.9, and lung was at 21.9. So some of my older systems, quote unquote, would have been my liver. So my liver came in at 25, blood 24.5, and hormone 23.9. So if you want to look at the biological age there, some systems are clearly in a better spot than others, but overall I would say I was pleased with the scores. So that kind of wraps up the TruAge piece. Of course, like when the actual test, there's a lot more detail, but I wanted to give just a high level of kind of where I stood. I'm going to move on now to the TruHealth report. So in the TruHealth report, I did notice a few things that were suboptimal, and some of these more actionable insights are actually found at the top of the report. So I have that right here. So in my top personalized recommendations for my TruHealth, we can see that one of the markers here, ATP synthase, so it'll actually tell you the name of the marker up at the top, and then you'll see just a subtitle underneath kind of explaining how to improve that. So for me, it was a few here: dopamine metabolites, carnosine, white blood cell count. And if you scroll down, you can actually see a little bit more detail. So it'll provide some lifestyle recommendations, some supplemental recommendations. Essentially, how do you kind of get on your way in terms of improving this? So for me, I took a look at the most actionable epigenetic biomarkers, and I wanted to start to implement some of the common recommendations that I was seeing across all of my quote unquote kind of suboptimal markers. So for me, it was a lot of managing stress, getting better sleep, kind of avoiding sugar, consuming low glycemic carbs, controlling carbohydrate intake, things like that. Some interesting things that I noticed here, considering an anti-inflammatory diet. One of the recommendations as well was a green Mediterranean diet, but we can get into that. So just a few things across the categories that I was noticing as things that were kind of trends in terms of recommendations. So this all made relative sense to me. So before I took the test, I was exercising about 6 times a week, resistance training. I was also doing 45-minute runs at the end of each of those workouts. I felt like I was chronically underslept. Stress with my day-to-day life was quite high. So I kind of knew going in that I was in a bit of a high stress, maybe overworked, potentially burnt out state. And that actually showed in my markers. And interestingly enough, like I did know that I needed to kind of tone it down a bit, but there is something about seeing this like objectively kind of presented in a test that made me decide that I really wanted to dial that in. So that kind of leads me into my next piece here. And so what are some of the lifestyle changes that I made? So when I got these results back, I took a look at the report. I was happy with a few things. I was unhappy with a few things, you could say. And I was thinking, okay, how can I now take the actionable steps, whether that be through behavior changes, lifestyle changes, supplementation, to make sure that I'm trending in the right direction. So breaking these up into different categories, when it started with, let's start with training here. So with regards to my training, I decided to reduce the volume based on a few markers. So like I said, many markers suggested that I should manage stress and improve sleep. I was thinking that a lot of my stress in my life also was coming from the fact that I was working out 6 days per week. I was doing runs at the end of that, so my recovery was down. I wasn't sleeping as much. And of course, the data from the test confirmed the suspicion I had, which is that I'd been slightly overtraining and under resting for a while. So what I did in that regard, I dropped from 6 times a week down to 4. The days that I'm not doing resistance training, I was doing cardiovascular training, so in zone 2 mostly, either on a bike or on the treadmill. So that was my changes by way of training. The next area that I explored was nutrition. So for this one, I took a little bit more of an active approach here. So many recommendations were to reduce sugar and some carbohydrate intake. There was a recommendation, like I said, on the green Mediterranean diet, and essentially that is the traditional Mediterranean diet, but with, I suppose, more greens, more vegetables in it. So in general, the Mediterranean diet tends to avoid red meat. It's more poultry and fish, kind of healthy fats like olive oil, avocado. And the green Mediterranean diet takes that a bit of a step further. So it recommends even less poultry and fish, a little bit more plant-based proteins and 0 red meat, and quite a bit more green vegetables. So I basically kind of took a bit of the green Mediterranean diet approach, but I didn't go that super into it. So I still do eat chicken, so poultry and fish. I did increase my fish intake. I don't eat red meat typically. I only will eat that if I'm going out or dining out. So I did actually reduce my red meat down to 0. And another thing that I reduced as well was my dairy consumption. Before I got this test, I was consuming quite a bit of milk and other dairy products. So I did bring that down a bit as I embarked on this new diet. So essentially, I also added some more fiber, and this was through prebiotics, just generally high fiber foods, and some probiotic friendly foods, so sauerkraut, kimchi, mostly those two. That's kind of just my own preference. Also, I had been trying a little bit of plant-based protein, not exactly my cup of tea. So what I did do is just, I kind of stuck a little bit more to the poultry and fish sources, and it seems like it's been working for me, right? So the last piece that I dialed in was lifestyle and recovery. Many of my markers suggested that I'd get better sleep, reduce my stress like I had mentioned. So there was also some supplement recommendations, namely ashwagandha and phosphatidylserine. So these were recommended as part of the managing stress biomarkers and pieces. Interestingly enough, as part of my exploration in terms of managing and reducing my stress, I did start looking into and incorporating certain cannabinoids as part of certain days to reduce anxiety and stress in just like a daily sense. So definitely going to talk more about that in the future, but it was something that I found to be very beneficial. Winding down in the evening has also been helpful. So one thing that I do sometimes a couple hours before bed is throw on some blue light blockers, and that's just reducing kind of blue light into my eyes, especially if I'm working a little bit later into the evening. I don't necessarily want to suppress those melatonin signals in my brain, right? So I actually found that to be quite helpful. It is a little bit silly. If I throw them on, it's basically just orange. So the whole point is to block the blue light. So basically what you're seeing is just orange. So it can be a bit of an eyesore, it can be a bit annoying, though I found that to be a really important part of my sleep hygiene and sleep wind down routine. So that's just something else I can also talk about in another video. Essentially my routine with blue light blockers, super helpful. So wrapping up here, the goal of these tests really is to measure the directionality of change. So like I had mentioned in the beginning, at any given moment, you can take a number, and sure, it can be somewhat helpful, but really it's the trend that we want to see. So the recommendations from TruDiagnostic themselves, the company that is, which I have no affiliation with, is to test every 2 to 3 months. However, I wanted to take a little bit more time to incorporate these lifestyle and supplemental interventions before I retested. So I'm aiming for the 6 to 7 month mark, so that should be coming up for me sometime in the next 3-4 months. What I'd be looking for personally is, if I can, a decrease in my Dunedin Pace of Aging score, hopefully a decrease in my biological age, though that's probably unlikely, but at least staying the same or relatively the same in biological age in that regard would be a win for me. I'd also be interested to see how much my reduction and better management of stress will play into new scores and if that improves them significantly. So just as a reminder, my top kind of personalized recommendations were highlighted. And of course, it doesn't mean that those are the only things that I could bring up from a level of being suboptimal, but those are the most actionable ones, or the ones that would probably move the needle the most. So be super interested to see on how those change in my next test. And if they do change in the positive direction, I'll likely continue with the interventions that I'm doing. And if there's no measurable change, or for whatever reason a decrease or some sort of negative outcome, then that'll help me dial in my routine further. And that kind of furthers the point of how multiple tests are actually going to be helpful, because in any given moment, I don't know what behavior changes or lifestyle factors could be affecting my scores. But now I've taken the test, I've taken the time to make lifestyle interventions, and now in my subsequent test, I can understand what's working, what's potentially not working. I have an idea of what changed from before I took the test to now. So it'll be a little bit more of a valid science experiment, if you want to call it that, right? I'm controlling different variables and I'm seeing the outcome from before and after. So really, ultimately, who is this test for? Or rather, these tests, the TruHealth and TruAge tests. So to me, I believe it's useful if you already train, you already care about recovery, you just want a little bit more of a in-depth feedback. So I think of these types of tests as what I call the tip of the pyramid type tests. So if you don't have your lifestyle in order, your training in order, your stress management in order, this type of test is not going to be super, super helpful. I think there's a lot of base of pyramid things that people can do, like adequate sleep, training, cardiovascular, that includes cardiovascular and resistance training, and a number of other things before someone goes and takes this test. Now, if you find yourself as someone who's very much interested in the longevity space, by all means, go for it. But usually people who are also interested in that are maxing out some of their other behaviors, so to speak. So that's who I kind of think these tests are for and who they would most benefit. I think it's a great tool to fine-tune some of the things that you may or may not have been doing, and I think also it helps highlight things that you may not have realized. So there were certain markers in the test that I didn't really think about. They were kind of spot on in terms of how I was living, but I didn't really think that they were actually affecting me, potentially in a negative way. So at the end of the day, ultimately, it's a fun way to kind of gamify your pursuit of health and longevity. If you're interested in that kind of thing, if you do really like numbers and data, it is a really fun thing to just kind of look at sometimes. And when you get your first results in, it's always interesting to see, oh, this is where I'm at here, or this is where I'm at there. So definitely try it out if you're into that kind of stuff. So when actually wrapping up here, this is how I think about health at Momentum Health. So I'm not chasing any short-term goals, but I want to understand the best way to optimize life and behaviors to live long and healthy, of course, while looking one's best. If this was helpful, like the video, subscribe, and check out my links below. Would really mean a lot to me. Super appreciate it. So, thanks.